everyone. Welcome back if you are just rejoining in. My name is Nicoletta Heidegger, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist and sexologist based here in Los Angeles. And today we are going to be talking about how to kind of come back to yourself during sex and hopefully during the rest of your life. So the first thing we are going to do is I like to do a little land acknowledgement. If you're not sure what that is, I will explain it. And then I will ask all of you to do a check-in with yourself, and I will kind of lead you through what that is. Then we are going to talk about the nervous system a little bit, and then I'm going to talk about how to find your erotic style and some tools and ways to come back to yourself during sex and in other areas of your life. So if you're not familiar with a land acknowledgement, it's basically just acknowledging the indigenous land that a person is on and occupying. So don't know where you all are located, but I'm located in the San Fernando Valley in Los Angeles. So I'm acknowledging the Gabrieleño and Tongva and Ahachamen and Juaneño as the traditional custodians of the Los Angeles region, along with the Chumash to the north and the west, and the Tataviam and Cahuilla nations to the east. If you are curious about knowing where in the land and what land acknowledgement you can use, I believe UCLA has a really good one called Mapping Indigenous Los Angeles, but you might be able to find out based on where you're at just by Googling. Okay, so to start us off, I like to invite people to do what is called a PIES check-in. I do this with my clients all the time. It's just an acronym. So the P stands for physically. So how are you doing in your physical body? The I stands for intellectually, which just means the thoughts and quality of your thoughts in your headspace. The E is emotionally. So how am I feeling? And the S stands for spiritually. So this is something that I invite folks to do all the time, to check in with themselves throughout the day. But I would invite, if you are listening right now, just to do that quickly with yourself. So again, P is physically, how's my body doing? So I'll just share mine just so you can do it yourself. I don't know if you'll be able to share it in the chat, but I would invite you to do this for yourself, just to actually do a check-in, because how many of us, when someone asks us how we are, we're like, fine, good, okay, but we really don't actually take the time to slow down and actually check in with ourselves. So the P is physically, again, so for me, I would say a tiny bit of tension, a little bit of a bummer that I can't share my screen, so I'm noticing a little bit of tension in my chest. The I is intellectually, and I would say for that, yeah, I'm feeling a little bit of lots of thoughts going on all at once, because I want to make sure to share as much as I can with you all. Emotionally, I'm feeling excited for the opportunity to get to be here and talk to you all. And spiritually, I kind of define that one. It doesn't have to be religious. I kind of define it as how connected you either feel to yourself or something else in the world. That could be nature, religion, your cat, whatever it is. And I would say I'm feeling connected to nature. So everyone do that for themselves, just to actually see how you are feeling. Okay, the next thing I'm going to talk about is the nervous system. And since folks can't see my PowerPoint, I'm going to invite you to open up another tab on whatever device you are viewing it on and Google something called polyvagal theory. You do not have to know all the sciences of what this means. So if you Google polyvagal theory and are able to go look at images, there should be like a cool looking chart that says like red, yellow, green on it, and it has like a little curve like this. If you're not able to find it, check it out later. Just Google polyvagal theory, Polyvagal, and that should be able to direct you to this. So if you're having science classroom flashbacks, try to ground yourself. I hope we won't get too sciencey with this. I don't want to get too sciencey with it. But the reason I bring up the nervous system is basically because that is our key to connection. That is our key to pleasure. Knowing our nervous system is our key to be able to connect with others. So just to kind of summarize it, if you've ever heard of the fight, flight, or freeze response, that's kind of what we're going to be talking about a little bit before we get more into pleasure. So if we are feeling grounded, if we are feeling good, if we are feeling sort of able to yeah, just be in a sort of good spot. We would call that being in like the area of our nervous system called the parasympathetic. All that basically means is that we are in a space in our body where we are able to connect with others, where we are feeling safe, and where we are feeling grounded and oriented to the environment around us. What's important to know about that is what happens in our physical body when we are feeling grounded. And the reason I'm going over this will probably be even clearer later, but it's basically talking about that we need to be in a certain space to be able to connect sexually and in pleasure with other people within our nervous system. So this sort of grounded state, also called the socially engaged state, it's also called rest and digest. So basically what happens in our physical body, oh, yay, somebody was able to pull it up. Thank you so much. Love you guys. Amazing. That is exactly what it looks like. So the green state is basically showing that we are able to digest in this state. We are most resistant to infection. So that means that our immune system is up and acting how it should. All the oxygen is circulating to the vital organs. And we're not sort of in that defensive response. So what can happen is if there is a potential threat or something we perceive as a threat, our nervous system becomes aroused. And I don't mean in the like sexy necessarily way aroused, but it becomes turned on in the sense that something activating comes in and our nervous system goes into a different response called the sympathetic. And so what happens with this is we can go into fight or flight, which means, oh, there's a threat and I want to turn towards it and either fight it or run the fuck away from it. With this, what happens in our body is our blood pressure increases, our heart rate increases, and we get a lot more cortisol happening. This is something that is an unconscious response in our body to a potential threat. And sometimes we need to go into this space. Like if we are being chased by an actual threat, we need to go into flight or we need to go into fight. And so that is important for sometimes things to happen. But unfortunately, when there's potentially a trauma that we've experienced, or we're in a long-term experience of COVID and something like that, our body may be staying in this state. And our body was not made to stay in this state with increased cortisol. Another thing to remember is that if we are in this activated state, the part of our brain that is responsible for connection, that's responsible for being able to connect in pleasure with other people, is turned off. So the part of our brain that allows us to connect with others becomes turned off when we are activated in this way, meaning we have to get back to a certain level of grounded. But you may notice that some of these things also happen when we're turned on in the sexy way, where our heart rate starts to increase, our pupils start to dilate, things like that happen, our breath starts to get shortened. So not all arousal is bad. And I'll get to that more in the next things that I'm talking about. If we push through this like fight or flight response, what happens is we can go into freeze response. That can look very much like depression. That can look very much like I can't, I won't do this, helpless feelings, sometimes even suicidal feelings. Our heart rate decreases, our blood pressure decreases, our temperature decreases. It's harder for us to make eye contact and hear sounds. So this is kind of like dissociated, like I'm totally checked out, I'm feeling numb. And this is also an unconscious thing that happens in our body when we think there's a threat that we cannot face. When we think that the threat is too big and instead we should just play dead almost. So this is important because obviously you cannot connect in pleasure and sexually when you are in this state. Some of us do have sex when we're in this state because maybe we feel like we can't speak up or we're not enjoying the sex that we're having. So obviously physically you can, but that doesn't mean that you're wanting it. So I wanted to bring this up just to give you a little bit of information about how sexual arousal is going to work. And so moving away from this overly sciencey chart, and if you have questions, feel free to ask them now or later, because I know this can be a lot of information for some folks. So the next thing I want to talk about is, like I was saying earlier, not all arousal is bad. So just because sometimes our body gets reactive to some kind of stimuli and maybe goes into that fight or flight response doesn't mean that obviously all arousal is bad. So when it comes to sex and pleasure, we ideally need a combination of arousal, meaning our nervous system gets turned on, like almost into that fight or flight state, And we need to have a good balance of that mixed with relaxation, which is this green part, this kind of social connected space. In order for sex and pleasure to happen in the best way possible, our body needs an ideal combination of that arousal and that relaxation. In the sex therapy world, this is called the dual control model. So the dual control model basically means that sexual response is a balance between things that excite us, things that accelerate our arousal, and things that inhibit arousal. Because like I said, if we're too aroused and we're in fight or flight, or we go all the way to that freeze response, we're not able to connect with people and be in our pleasure space. But obviously, if we have no arousal, we're not going to want to have sex either. So ideally, we're trying to look for this almost like a car, these brakes and these accelerators to help us balance arousal and relaxation. Because again, if we're too aroused, we might be totally nervous or anxious to have sex. But if we're not aroused at all, we're going to be sleeping. And unless that's your kink and you have consented to that, you might not be having sex. So like a car, everybody has different sensitivities to what is called their brakes and their accelerators. So what I mean by this is that some people have really sensitive brakes, meaning there's a lot of things that kind of put them into an area where they're not aroused, where they're not excited. And some people have really sensitive accelerators, meaning that everything around them turns them on. And so each person, like a car, has different sensitivities. And so you might be someone who has really sensitive brakes, aka a lot of things that maybe pull you out of the mood. And you might be someone who has really sensitive accelerators, the things that put you in the mood. Or you might be someone who has no sensitivity to brakes at all, like nothing could take you out of the mood. There could be a hurricane and the house is falling down and you still want to fuck, and that's wonderful. So each person, and it's very normal to have variations, each person has their own variation of this. And so what we're going to talk a little bit about today is how to kind of find that balance for you and what helps you put on your accelerators and what helps you deactivate your brakes so that you can hopefully have more pleasure, sex, and connection. Okay. Last thing I want to talk about in this before we move on to some things that are a little more interactive is the difference between arousal and desire. So like I was saying with this chart, arousal is just the body's unconscious physical response to stimuli. And so again, that doesn't have to be sexual or erotic. It's just like some kind of stimulation comes in, my nervous system gets turned on, and it does it unconsciously because it's just responding to some external input. And so arousal, again, is just the body's physical response to some kind of input. Versus desire. Desire is more the head and the heart of, I am wanting to do this thing. I am wanting to have sex. I am wanting to connect with somebody. The reason that this is important is sometimes people experience what's called arousal non-concordance. So a big word that just basically means sometimes we experience arousal without desire, and sometimes we experience desire without arousal. And so what that can mean is sometimes your body responds to a stimuli and is ready to go, is ready to connect sexually, but desire-wise, you're not wanting it. This is very important, especially when we're talking about consent, because folks who are in a situation where maybe they weren't consenting can obviously still get lubricated, can still get erect, can still experience orgasm, but that doesn't mean that they were consenting. That doesn't mean that desire-wise they wanted to do the thing. Their body was just responding naturally and unconsciously to some kind of stimulation. On the flip side, sometimes we experience desire where we so badly want to connect with somebody, but our body is not responding with the arousal that we would like, aka we're struggling to get an erection when we want to, or we're not getting as wet as we would like to. And so this is important because we really want to make sure that we're naming these things and defining them in different ways, because that's going to help us figure out what might be getting in the way of you potentially coming back to yourself in the moment. Is it a struggle with your body? Is it a struggle with your desire? Is it a struggle with both of those things? And this arousal versus desire can also connect to this other thing that I want to share with you guys, which is something called responsive versus spontaneous desire. So some of you out there may know exactly what this is. If you don't, there is a lot of research out there about it that you are welcome to look up. But again, it's called responsive versus spontaneous desire. So spontaneous desire is basically like the wind blows and all of a sudden I have a boner and I'm ready to have sex. And like it's spontaneous, if you will. And that is sort of indicative of desire happening at the same time as physical arousal. Responsive desire, on the other hand, is sort of like, I don't even think about the idea of sex until my body becomes physically aroused and until all of the things around me are aligning and line up. And so the reason why this is important is because a lot of times people in partnerships choose someone who's their opposite. So you'll see a lot of people who are spontaneous desire with someone who's responsive desire. And a lot of times that spontaneous person might be like, why doesn't my responsive desire person want to connect sexually with me? And then that responsive person might be annoyed that their spontaneous partner keeps reaching for them or grabbing their boobs or wanting to hook up or whatever. And so for the responsive person, all this means is that, and not in a rapey, non-consensual way, all this means is that you might not be experiencing desire spontaneously, meaning you might not be thinking about sex, you might not be wanting to have sex until your body becomes physically aroused, or until you do all the things necessary to allow for desire to come in. Maybe you're someone who needs the dishes to be done first. Maybe you need the house to be clean. And so we're going to talk about how to kind of set the stage to allow that responsive desire to come in. And so for someone who's responsive, they may not immediately, if someone initiates with them, they might not immediately be like, oh yeah, I want to do that. But instead they might be like, oh, I'm willing to see if my body will get there. And again, like I said, not in a non-consensual way of forcing yourself to do something you don't want to do. But it's sort of like, oh, I'm not in the mood right now, but I'm willing to see if that changes, and kind of sharing that with a potential partner and being like, I'm not sure if I'm going to be a yes, but let's start kissing and kind of see where things go, and I'll see if that changes. And then oftentimes for that responsive person, once their body starts getting physically aroused, they're like, oh, I remember that I like this. I remember that this is pleasurable. Then their body starts getting turned on, and then they're like, oh, I remember that I like doing this. And then they have desire. So that is important to know as we're going to explore the rest of this stuff coming up. Feel free to ask any questions so far. I know I'm throwing a lot of information at you. Okay, so what kind of car do you have? So if you're just joining in and are like, why are you talking about cars and sex? Reminder that we all are kind of like cars, and that we have different sensitivities of what arouses us, what accelerates us, and what brings us out of the mood, or what breaks us out of sexual desire and arousal. So we won't have time to go over this all today, but for folks listening, I would invite you to do a little homework if you're feeling like being a good student. There is a wonderful book, if you haven't read it yet, by researcher Emily Nagoski. It's called Come As You Are, and it talks all about this. If you are not someone who likes to read, or maybe doesn't have time to read or listen to a book, she has a wonderful worksheet that I would invite you to do for yourself. So if you just Google Come As You Are, spelt C-O-M-E, not C-U-M, Come As You Are worksheets, you should be able to find that link. And there's a link under there called Sexual Temperament. And this basically helps you figure out how sensitive are your brakes and how sensitive are your accelerators. It's basically a little questionnaire that you can fill out, probably takes 5 to 10 minutes. And then once you get kind of your numbers, you can look at the results and see how sensitive your brakes and accelerators are. And that's something that it's great to know for yourself. So you know, what does it take for me to get to a place of desire? And also a really key thing to be able to share with partners, so that they know that it's maybe not personal, but you just have a different kind of quote unquote car than they do. So a little invitation for homework: Google Come As You Are worksheets, click on Sexual Temperament, and figure out how sensitive are your brakes and accelerators. Are you more spontaneous? Are you more responsive? this will help you figure it out. Okay, the next thing I want to introduce to you is something called erotic blueprints. So erotic blueprints was created by a sex educator named Miss Jaya. And so she basically created these almost like personality types for our erotic style. And the reason I find this so important is that a lot of people read sometimes, whether it's like Cosmo or whatever, but they read these sort of like how to have better sex, how to do this. And they're very like one size fits all. And so in order to come back to your body and to come back to yourself and to experience more pleasure and excitement and connection, we have to figure out what your erotic language is. Because if you're somebody who maybe it requires a certain kind of lighting or a certain kind of like scent and smell. Maybe you're really sensitive to the sensual environment that you're in. If you need a certain kind of texture, and all those things can bring you out of the mood. If I just start doing something that doesn't address all of that, it might not help you. And so the key thing is to figure out what is your erotic style and erotic language. So we're going to take a second right now for listeners out there to check out what their thing is, so that you can figure yours out. Okay, Google erotic blueprints, and then not a huge fan of this company for all that it does, but they do have a good article on it. Go down to the goop.com article that says, what's your erotic blueprint type? Click on that. And then scroll down a little bit to the third Q&A that says, what are the 5 erotic blueprints? So I'm going to stop talking at you for a moment and let you explore this on your own and read this for just a few minutes. So take a minute and check this out. Read through the area that says, what are the 5 erotic blueprints? And then the next area that says, what are the shadow sides? The shadow sides are just sort of the things that put your brakes on, the things that bring you out of the moment. So take a few minutes just to read this, see which one you align with. Again, it's not like set in stone. And I would say that most people have different percentages of these different types. So read through them, see which one you align with. And this is going to be helpful for a little later when I talk about how to bring yourself back to the moment based on your erotic blueprint. So take a few minutes to read this. I will shut up. If you have a Q&A question in the meantime, let me know. And yeah, take a few minutes to yourself to read this and see which ones you align with. Kelly said definitely a shapeshifter potentially. I am also a shapeshifter. So take a moment to continue reading through this, and thanks for helping share the screen. So now we're looking at the shadow side. So this is, I don't want to say the downside, but this is sort of like the brakes, the thing that puts on the brakes. And again, if you need a little more time to read, I know everyone has different reading styles. Feel free to pull this up, hopefully on Google or another thing, so you can read it at your own pace. And all you're going to Google to find that is erotic blueprints, and then go down to the Goop article. And thanks to those of you who are sharing in the Q&A. We've got someone who said they're a kinky type, another person who said they're a sensual. Yeah, and just notice if anything shifts once you've read the shadow sides of things. Take another minute or two to hopefully finish reading this. All right, let's come back together. If you haven't finished it, I'm sorry. I definitely want to respect everyone's reading pace, but I know we only have a little bit of time together today. So I hope that you can pull that up and continue reading if it's something you're curious about. Again, the creator of that, Miss Jaya, she has a cool quiz that you can take that helps identify that for you. And they also have like a big class, I think some free, some paid, if you're really interested. I find it to be great to do with a partner because it is okay if your erotic style is different from a partner. With my clients, I kind of like to challenge this misnomer of like, we're either have chemistry or we don't. Sometimes it's true that, you need to look at exactly what you're looking for sexually or romantically in a relationship. And if things don't align, it might not be a good fit. But most couples and partnerships that I know have different blueprints. And I think the reason for that is often we are attracted to kind of our opposite. And then at least at the beginning, that can be fun and exciting because it's like someone pulling us out of our comfort zone. But then after time, we can get annoyed because we're like, why aren't you exactly like me and doing exactly what I want and how I want it? And so it's okay if you're a different blueprint, but the ideal is that you want to make sure that you are with somebody or someones that are open and willing to learn your blueprint language. So just like if you were someone who only spoke Spanish and you met someone who you fell in love with that only spoke French, you can learn each other's language and learn to communicate together, but there needs to be a willingness to learn. So it's okay if you have opposing blueprints, as long as your potential partners have a willingness to learn and speak your language. And on the flip side, as long as you can manage some patience as they're learning your blueprint. Of course, you could also shift that and be like, I only want to date people who have the same blueprint. There's going to be other potential issues in the relationship, but sometimes for folks, they like to choose someone who has their matching blueprint. Okay. Someone else shared they used to be mostly sensual, but now there's more kink involved. That is great. Thank you for sharing that, because these blueprints are not set in stone. It's not something that it's yours and it never changes over time. Sexuality, desire, and arousal shifts over time. And that could be due to age, that could be due to hormones, that could be due to new experiences, that could be due to partners, that could be due to trauma, that could be due to just, who knows, it's fluid. And so it's good, I think, to look at this over time and see potentially how it shifts, because it certainly can shift. Okay, so if you were reading through these and you were like, I still have no idea, you are certainly not alone, because a lot of people have not slowed down enough to take the time to really figure out what they do like, or maybe they don't know how to know what they like. And so a few tools for this, if you're reading and you still don't know, or maybe you know, but you'd like to know a little more. Again, I wish we could go through all of them today, and unfortunately we can't, but I'm going to give you some tools to look up, and then we're going to do a few tools together. So one tool we're not going to do today that I would invite you to look up, that I will put in the chat, is called body mapping. Body mapping is basically like doing a Google Maps for your entire body and figuring out where you like to be touched or not, and where and how, with what frequency, with what textures, with what amount of force. And this is basically like almost like a mindfulness body exercise to map your entire body for yourself. So Google and check out body mapping as a little homework for yourself if you'd like to practice this a little more. Again, I would encourage you to read that book, Come As You Are. It's definitely written for people with vaginas, but I think it's great for all genders, and they can take something from it. Another thing that you can do is going back to those Come As You Are worksheets that we were talking about. And another worksheet is called the Ideal Sexy Context Worksheet. And so that worksheet is basically invites you to think about the best sex you ever had. And I define sex as anything that's consensual that could bring you pleasure. And so that could be self-pleasure, that could be masturbation, that could be eating cake, that could be giving a lecture, like however you define sex. It asks you to think about the most pleasurable experience you've had, and then helps you go through what made it the most pleasurable, to help you kind of name what are the things that that really help accelerate my desire and my arousal. And what are the things that not so much? And again, this can change over time. So maybe the best one you had, you're like, I don't want that kind of sex anymore, but it's going to help kind of open that conversation with yourself to figure out what are your ideal sexual contexts. So shout out again to Emily Nagoski for creating those. I love them as a tool. So let's do a little practice together now. This is one we do have a little bit of time for. So what we're going to practice now is something called the yes, no, maybe in the body. And so for those of you out there tuning in, how many of you know what a yes feels like in your body, what a no feels like, and what a maybe I'll get there feels like? So you may know that for sure, but I don't mean a yes in your head. I mean a yes in your body. So I want to invite you, if you're willing, and of course you don't have to, and I can't see or tell what you're doing, so it's totally up to you. I want to invite you to, you can either close your eyes or leave them open if eyes closed doesn't feel good for you. And I want you to imagine something in your life that was not shitty. So something that was really pleasurable, something that was either pleasurable or neutral. So this could be a person, a place, a thing, a meal that you ate, an animal that you love, an experience that you had, something in your life that doesn't suck. And once you kind of have that in your head, I want to invite you to, again, eyes open or closed, to start seeing if you can sense into what that thing is. What makes you in your body, in your physical body, know that it's something that was pleasant or neutral? How do you know in your physical body as you think about it? And start to really see if you can focus on all the senses of that yes thing. So that could be the way it looked, the way it smelled, the way it feels in your hands, the way it felt in your mouth, whatever the yes thing is. And as you're doing this now, I want you to check in with your physical body and see if you can notice anything that's happening in it. AKA, how do you know that this is a yes? Does your heart rate start to slow, or does it quicken in a pleasant way? Do you feel a warm sense of something? And really just start to, not in a judgmental, but just a curious way, what happens in your physical body as you think about this thing that was a hell yes, this thing that was pleasant, this thing that you enjoyed, or this person you enjoyed, whatever it was. Just taking a little more time to sense into that. And so we're just doing a quick version of this, but hopefully you were able to feel something in your physical body. And that is what a yes potentially feels like for you. I don't know exactly what was happening for each of you, so, hard to say exactly, but ideally, like I said, you felt something in your body that was like, this is what happens in my body when something is a yes, when something is pleasant, when it's something that I like. So now on the flip side, and I would invite you not to use like a 10-level trauma, because I don't want to get you so activated here where you're going to need therapy from this presentation, which, if you do, pineapple is here. But I want to invite you to think of something that was a no. And that could be as small as like, I didn't want to eat that meal tonight, or I didn't want to go to that concert. So something that's not like a 10-level trauma, but maybe something a little less traumatic that you thought was like a hell no for you. Of course, if you want to think of something more triggering, that's up to you. But thinking of something that was a no for you and trying to remember a little bit of the details of that, some of the context, something that was a hell no. And just inviting you to kind of sense into that, what was happening, what other sensations do you remember? Do you recall about that? And seeing if you can sense into your physical body right now, what happens in your physical sensations that maybe tells you this is a no. Does your chest start to tighten up? Does your jaw start to clench? Do your muscles start to tighten into fists? What happens in your physical body? And just taking a few moments to notice that. Checking in with your whole body if you can. And so again, that was kind of short, but hopefully that gave you a taste for what does a no feel like in your body. And so if you do want to go home and try this body mapping exercise or start to explore more of what erotic blueprint you are, I hope that this can be a stepping stone to remember what is a yes and what is a no. And for folks out there, if this can be true for anyone, but if you've experienced a lot of traumas, or if you've experienced a lot of things where people didn't listen to your yeses and your nos, or if you're struggling with some self-confidence and you don't feel like you deserve to have yeses, that's obviously something that you're going to need some additional support on, potentially from a therapist, to help you work through that, to get to a place of I deserve yes, or I deserve that if something is a yes, that it's going to be respected, or if something is a no, that it's going to be respected. Someone just asked, what are more body mapping resources or other similar techniques for someone who typically dissociates and finds it difficult to feel the yes and no sensationally? Great question. I would say, if you're able to do it, my favorite type of therapy for something like that is something called somatic experiencing. I'll put that in the chat, somatic experiencing, but it basically helps you kind of reset and work through nervous system issues, especially when it comes to trauma. Because I would say, I don't know you personally, whoever's asking this, but dissociation usually happens when it's something that's either overwhelming or if it's a potential trauma response. Again, that kind of freeze response of like, oh, this is threatening and I can't go up against it. So having a support person that is safe to help you work through this. I really like the type of therapy called somatic experiencing. There's also people called sexological body workers. These are basically like sex educators and coaches who help you to work through things in real time in a safe container. If that is not in your budget, if you're not ready to go to somebody, I would recommend a book called Waking the Tiger. By Peter Levine, and it's this type of therapy, somatic experiencing, but it talks a lot about that dissociation and that freeze response, and it offers a lot of really great techniques to start out with. So I wish we could get into it even more. Maybe I can have a future panel that talks more just specifically about that. But I hope that one of those can maybe be a good starting point for you, because this is something that happens for a lot of folks. And like I said, it often happens when the body feels overwhelmed or threatened in some way. Or it could also be, for folks who are neurodiverse, whether you're on the spectrum or have ADHD or just have trouble kind of staying in the moment. There are lots of reasons that this could happen. So getting some support on that in a safe container with someone who knows what's up can be great. Let me know if I answered your question. Wonderful. Okay. All right, a little bit more before I open it up to questions. Thank you for those of you who are staying in and staying present. I know it's a lot of information. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about some potential other tips for each specific blueprint. So if you did align with one or more of the blueprints, excuse me, hopefully you can find these to be some helpful tools to get you started. Okay. And again, for everyone, if you missed that part, I would invite you to go back to some other tools that I mentioned before, which was Googling the body mapping, and then looking at and reading Emily Nagoski's Come As You Are, or Peter Levine's Waking the Tiger, if you're interested in the kind of trauma and nervous system side of things. And then additionally, doing that worksheet from Come As You Are called the Sexy Context Worksheet, to help you figure out what are your yeses and what those can look like and feel like. Okay, so other tips for increasing pleasure and coming back to yourself based on your style or your erotic blueprint. So I would invite you to try out, all of these to see what actually works for you, because I think, it depends, especially if you're trying to figure out, what your blueprint is, or you're not sure. You might want to try a few of these on and see what's up. So a few quick tips for all styles. I would say one main one is to first try to explore, and this could be done in therapy with someone like a Pineapple Support, therapist or coach, is to explore why you may or may not feel worthy of more pleasure or of being in the moment. And obviously that's something you can do with the support of a sex therapist or a coach. One other tip I would say for everyone, especially if you are in sex work, is to make sure that you do something, anything, even if it's just 30 seconds, to do something for yourself in the morning before you do something for anyone else. Before you pick up your phone, before you check your emails, before you make a custom where you are doing something for a client, before you, maybe before you even greet your partner in the morning. To do something just for you. This is a practice. It's not always easy. I can say that I don't always practice it myself. It is really hard to not just immediately pick up my phone and start doom scrolling on Instagram. But if you can start creating this practice in the morning where you do something just for yourself, It's going to change your neural pathways, it's going to change your brain chemistry, and it's going to change the narrative that you are valuable, that you are important, and that you deserve space and pleasure. So even if you're just starting with a 30-second thing, do something for yourself in the morning. That could be making a shake. That could be putting on your favorite song and just rolling around in the bed. That could be taking 5 deep breaths, but just something, anything with the intention of, I'm doing this just for myself and I'm doing this just for pleasure. That's it. Even if it's spending 10 extra seconds in the shower, like touching a part of your body that feels really good. Something that's just for you before you do anything for anyone else. Okay, moving on to the specific blueprints, and then I'll open it up to questions. So if you are someone who related to the sensual, and the thing I really love about this blueprint approach from Jaya is I find that people who align with a certain blueprint also find that that blueprint shows up in non-sexual areas of their life. So for example, if you're someone who gets in your head a lot, that's probably going to happen in other areas that aren't just sex. And so some of these tools you can also use even when it's not just coming back to your body with sex. It can be anytime in your life. So I find that, like I said, that erotic blueprint kind of spans different different activities that aren't just sex and pleasure. So if you are a sensual, first thing that's important with all these blueprints is to share that with a partner. Have them look at this article or take that quiz and see what their thing is so that you have a common language where you can actually talk about this. Another few things I would invite you to do, and this is just the tip of the iceberg, but what is important if you're a sensual is you need to set the stage for erotic space and pleasure with all of your senses. So looking at what kind of space leaves you feeling open to desire and arousal and really creating that. So whether that's specific lighting, whether that's specific smells and textures, the sensual cannot just wait for that sort of spontaneous, desire person to come and be like, let's have sex, because you're going to probably need some more time to prep or to like simmer the water, as I like to say. It's sort of like if a sensual person, I would say, is kind of like a classic car that really needs to like be treated a certain way, that needs to be maybe turned on and run a little bit before they just go for a drive. So you really need to set the stage for yourself and take responsibility for your own desire and arousal and set the stage with all the senses that feel good to you. So make sure you have a space and create a space that allows you to be open to the idea of desire and arousal. I would say this also includes addressing any underlying blocks like trauma and things like that. For you, if you are a sensual and you get taken out of the moment, to bring you back to the moment, you cannot rely on your brain. So if you're trying to bring yourself back to the moment by being like just using logic, it's not going to work. You need to come back to the senses and you need to slow down. So you might need to be like, hey, I need to take a pause and I need to actually jump in the shower for a second. And it is okay to pause if you can. If you're with someone or in a situation where you can't take a pause, that might be another issue. You might need to take a pause and go back to kissing. You might need to take a pause and feel your skin or feel the texture of something next to you, feel the sheets. But in order for you to come back to the present moment, you have to speak that sensual language. So you can't just go logic, you need to come back to the senses. Maybe there's a good smell you like, have it on your bedside table, smell that for a second. Go back to starting a little bit from the beginning, go back to slow kissing, slowing down. Other things you can do would be grounding techniques that have to do with the senses. So like I said, that could be smelling something that you really like the smell of, picking a color that you really like and naming all the things in the room or touching all the things in the room with that color. Listening to a certain kind of music. So anything with the 5 senses can really help you come back to yourself if you're a sensual. But again, you also need to set the stage and do some prep work to have a space that allows for that, and then to also have the things around you that help come back to yourself. Okay. If you are an energetic, again, important to share that with a partner, be able to discuss that with a partner. I would also say, for the energetic, there's a lot of liking the almost touching. There's a lot of liking that tease. So For this, I would invite you to maybe try body mapping without touch. So instead of mapping your body by being like, oh, how do I like it this way? It would just be to like, if you can see me, to like hold your hand and see what you like in that way without even touching. Because you might notice if you're an energetic that you can feel excitement and arousal just from the almost, just from the warmth of your hand, just from the deliciousness of like, oh, it's almost touching, or like just barely touching, just the tips of your fingers. So that's something you can do with yourself, but also with a partner. So again, try the body mapping or with yourself or with a partner of like the almost touch. Another thing I like for the energetic to come back to the moment is to slow down and do those almost touches. And you can do that with kissing too. So doing like an almost kiss, where if you find yourself getting out of the moment of being able to say like, oh, I need that, like that tease for a second. Can we come back to the tease? And then you can do like an almost kiss, and stay there for a moment and see if something shifts within you. I would also say energetics, because they are sensitive to energy, figuring out how to cleanse or clean your space inside yourself and outside yourself so that it allows you to have the specific kind of energy in your space that you need. So whether that's like where you're filming customs or doing your work or where you're having sex with a partner, those two spaces may look very different because it's work and, you know, home life stuff. So do some things to see like what kind of energy do I vibe with and how do I create that energy. That could be saging the space. If you are into spiritual stuff, that could be cleaning the area because it's, you know, maybe you feel out of sorts energetically if you're like, oh, there's my like 2-day-old food and there's my old Red Bull can. So like cleanse your space. And then inner wise, you might be affected energetically. So that may be somewhere where you have to do some work in therapy. And same thing with the sensual. For the energetic, it's important to take responsibility for your own patterns here. And so if you know that you need some of these specific things to help set the space for you, how can you make sure that you're owning that you know that, and that you're taking the time to set the stage so that if someone's wanting to connect with you sexually and in pleasure, that you're not just waiting for them to turn you on or to arouse you, that you're already sort of in that like, I don't know, like energetic, kind of, again, the simmering water space, or like the, like I said, the car in the garage where you've been like preparing yourself. So then when someone does want to connect with you, you're kind of already vibrating, if that makes sense. Okay. If you are a kinky person, again, like with all the rest, share with a partner, try to get the partner to do it. I think with this, you're going to want to be working on finding a balance, and this is something you can do in therapy, but work on finding a balance of shame and self-acceptance. Because with kink, shame to an extent can be really fun. And maybe we don't want to get rid of some of that fun, exciting, you know, taboo shame. But obviously, if it goes too far in the shaming realm, it's not going to feel good. And even if you're someone who does, you know, kink scenes for work and things, take some time to explore this for yourself. Go to like a pro dom for yourself, not just for work, not just in a scene. Go to a pro dom and explore what you really like about kink. Even if you think you already know, go again. Take some classes, take some educational classes on kink and BDSM, even if you think you already know all the things, even if you're a pro yourself, take some time to slow down and really come back to what you like about it and what excites you about it. I would also say something I like if you're kinky, depending on if you're more submissive, dominant, switchy, is to explore the idea of self-doming. And so for the kink person, if you align with some kind of like having like a dominant character in some of your play, it can be cool to figure out how to dom yourself to bring yourself back to the present moment. So that could look anything like the way you talk to yourself in your head, like, oh, if you want to be a really good girl, you'll like come back to the kiss right now. The way you kind of talk to yourself. You can even in a very, I would say in a very intentional way, not in a self-harm way, you could do some like self-kink. So whether that's like little slaps you give yourself or little pinches that you give yourself, again, not in a hurting yourself, like not intentional way, but a way to kind of bring you back to your senses, maybe some little spanks, maybe some little pinches, maybe the way you talk to yourself in your head, that could really help. Okay. For the shapeshifter, the main thing you're going to want to work on is to take the time to get to know how to feed and take care of yourself and what you actually want or need. Because if you're someone who is a shapeshifter, you may be looking at a lot of like what other people want and just kind of chameleoning into that. So you might be doing some work on self-judgment or worrying about feeling like you're too much for other people. And if you're asexual, there's an article I really like about this, but I'm going to put it into the chat here. So if you can't see that for some reason, let me know, and maybe the pineapple folks can help me because I know we're running out of time. But if you're asexual, this is some stuff that I think can help bring you back to the moment and help you kind of challenge yourself to slow down a little bit. So I want to open it up to questions now. I know we covered a lot of things. I'm going to answer the question that someone sent earlier, but feel free to ask some more in the last 2 minutes that we have. Okay, so question was, what support would you provide people pleasers who feign arousal interest based on their partner's desires? So that could be like the people pleaser. I think someone also asked that when we were talking about the nervous system. And so for me, the sort of people pleasing or fawning response is also sort of a form of freezing. It can happen for a lot of different reasons, but it usually happens when someone grew up in a situation where they felt like they had to mediate everything and where they felt like they had to take care of others. And so I would say it's not necessarily a quick fix in like, do this one thing and it'll be gone. I would say that's a good one for therapy to, especially with someone who is trauma informed, or does some kind of somatic in the body work, like that somatic experiencing we were talking about, because that can help you work through the potential trauma of why your body feels the need to take care of others to feel safe, because that people pleasing thing is a trauma response. And it's usually done because it was like, if I don't mediate or moderate or, please others around me, then things got scary and dangerous. So your nervous system is doing what it feels like it's supposed to do by people pleasing, because it's worried that if it doesn't, something bad will happen. So thank your nervous system, acknowledge it for there was a time when you needed to do that to be safe, but now you don't have to anymore. And so you may need to work on that with a therapist to help undo that. We probably have time for one more short question before we switch. So anybody else have a question before we wrap it up? Okay. Well, thank you all so much. I hope you, sorry again about the inability to share the PowerPoint. Not sure what happened, but thank you to the Pineapple team for helping fill in the gaps there. Really appreciate it, and you being on it. I do host a podcast called Sluts and Scholars that Leah from Pineapple Support has also been on, and hope you enjoy the rest of the presentations. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. You're always it was a pleasure to work with. And hopefully I'll get to see you soon.
Likewise, I know I miss seeing all of you in person, and now things are happening again. I'm sure everyone's tired of these Zooms, but I'm glad we could make it work, and so glad that Pineapple puts all of this together. So thank you.
Thank you so much.